Muslims.
We learn from the Quran and other hadith and so on that slavery, for example, you just mentioned about the Greeks and the Romans, in Islam as well, slavery is allowed. What are the conditions in which this permission has been given?
Well, it is given in the case of jihad, really, where there is a struggle, a military struggle, and a population has been taken captive, etc., or numbers have been taken captive of the enemy. The ruler of the Muslim state has the choice to either hold them as prisoners and ransom them, etc., or he may take them as slaves. Slaves meaning that they would be integrated into the Muslim society. Because slavery in Islam, what may be called slavery, is really more akin to indentured labor than it is to slavery, as known typically in Western civilization, where the slave master was free to do anything he wished with his slave. He could maim them, cut off their ears, do anything he wanted. They were his property. That's why slaves were given the name of the master, just as the chariot and the wife was given the name of the master. He was free to do anything he wished. Whereas in Islamic law, this is not the case. A slave has the right to seek personal freedom by what they call mukataba. He will pay for himself and can liberate himself. If a slave woman bears a child to her master, that child is born free, and she cannot be sold. The slaves, the same thing. Remember, they cannot be killed. If they're killed, then the person who has killed them will be taken to account. They can't be forced to do crimes, for the master, for example. So, and even in the case of how they're referred, the Prophet ﷺ had forbidden that slaves be referred to as my slave girl, my slave boy. No, my young man, my young woman. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said, because the idea of slave, anyway, is limited really to God. Abdullah, we are slaves of Allah. But slaves of other human beings, ultimately, no. We are put in a position of authority over others, and Islam found that system already in practice in the world, and it corrected the ills and the evils of it. And at the same time, it put in force a variety of principles to eradicate it practically in the society, whether it is from the heads of zakah. People could be freed from the zakat, the essential treasury, where money is collected from the rich of the society and redistributed amongst the poor. Part of that distribution is in freeing slaves in the society. Also, where people break oaths and a variety of different sins that a person may commit. The atonement for the sin involves freeing a slave, where the slaves are in existence. So slavery was on the way out, really, in Muslim society. Was being eradicated, but gradually, as people were integrated into the society. And we should note that the majority of Abbasid rulers, the Abbasid era, after the time of the Prophet, we had the 4 righteous caliphs, then you had the Umayyad era, which ran for about 100 years. Following that, you had the Abbasid era, which ran for many hundreds of years. Many of those rulers, the caliphs of the Abbasid eras, were the children of slave girls. And that is something inconceivable in a slave society, of other slave societies, Rome, Greece, etc. It was inconceivable that the child of a slave could ever become the ruler of the society. Many of the leading scholars of hadith and tafsir of the Quran, etc., from the early generation, were freed slaves. From the time of the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he had freed a slave that had been given to him, Zayd ibn Haritha, and had adopted him. And that tradition, spread amongst Muslims that they would free their slaves, whoever came into a position of slavery. Today in the world, of course, there's a lot of slavery going on. Going on right here in India, going on in Pakistan, going on in many, even in Western countries. Across Europe, people are sold into slavery. In Brazil, in North America, So it is an ongoing phenomenon, though the finger tends to be pointed at Muslims, but really it's going on till today. And Muslims' duty is to eradicate those forms, because the way in which it's being done is illegal. It is people being taken advantage of, people who are seeking jobs in different areas and being sold into slavery. This is a whole other kind of circumstance, and a Muslim could not buy one of these quote-unquote so-called slaves and say, okay, now I have a slave. No. I mean, those avenues today are closed.
Moving on.